Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Exercise is Bullshit. I'm so excited to be joined today with a great guest. Andrew Coates joins me from the neighbors to the north up there in Canada, eh? So Andrew is one of the leaders in the evidence-based fitness space. He's a fantastic follow on Instagram, always posting really good, usable information for coaches, for clients. So Andrew, I couldn't be more thrilled for you taking the time out of your busy schedule today. Why don't you say hello and introduce yourself?
Logan, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's nice to see you again. I have been a trainer for 14 years. Somewhere along the way, I was interested in writing, so I started writing probably for my own website. And then because of a podcast and the relationship capital that came from that and traveling to fitness conferences, I got an invitation to write for T Nation. So T Nation is kind of one of the OG big strength conditioning websites. And that led to writing for more things like True Coaching, Generation Iron, eventually Muscle and Fitness and Men's Health, which are big. And then later on, Barbend, On It, Kabuki Strength, Personal Trainer Development Center, loads of stuff. And then I said, all right, well, I better have a social media presence to complement some of the stuff I was writing for initially. So I just started getting very consistent with social media. And of course, that sort of rapidly grew across several years. So now that's kind of bigger. And just between the combination of all those sort of things, it leads to a lot of interconnectivity in the industry, visibility, and I guess brand. And ultimately, I kind of didn't realize what I was up to at the time, but I figured, all right, well, the way forward is to have a strong personal brand because we're no longer going to be able to differentiate ourselves on the strength of the quality of programs anymore. I mean, artificial intelligence is going to start once you get big enough data sets, the machine learning side of that, it will create incredible programs. And quite frankly, and people might not like hearing this, AI will get better and better at even simulating a coach's response. And it's sort of weird. And this is something people take for granted. People will gravitate more towards, and they already are. There's a certain subjects that will gravitate to apps and structured programs. And ultimately it's a clean, sanitized, low friction experience. And even when you get into this AI coaching that will eventually happen, people will self-select to something that cleans up a lot of the complicated and messy human interaction. Now, I think that's where the opportunity is. Where were we? Okay.
You were doing a great rant, so keep it up.
What people don't sort of realize is there are already other ways that we self-select to interact with artificial relationships versus real world people complexity. It shows up in how people will, this will sound kind of nuts, but get into chats with OnlyFans girls, which is also pretty soon, if not a lot of it already, is going to be AI or dudes pretending to be women, right? That's kind of messed up. Or other sort of internet interactions. And it's a barrier between actually having to get vulnerable or get into what can be a messy and potentially unknown or challenging relationship with a real human being. I mean, this goes to actual romantic relationships, friend relationships, all sorts of other stuff, right? So when it comes down to coaching, there will be people that will gravitate to something that is structured, that it doesn't have a lot of surprises, and that they kind of can control. But then the flip side is, and those people are already going for, various apps, right? And just for structure. They don't need a lot of human interaction. They just need the accountability. They need to know what to do. They want it low friction, right? And I think coaches should be cognizant of this idea of low friction. But on the flip side, there will always be a lot of people who go for analog in a world of ever increasing digital, right? The people who want the vinyl records, which I've really gotten into the last several years, and I love it. The experience is just different, right? There's more challenge to it. It's more expensive, but it reminds me of how I grew up. So I think a lot of people gravitate to coaches who are actually real human people, as opposed to the digital construct that we're going to see more and more of. And that means that coaches need to have personal brand. They need to show more and more their personality. We've been hearing this for a long time, but you need to show your favorite bands. I'm wearing a hat and a shirt of one of my favorite bands, Tool, right? I just saw on Twitter that two of my other favorite bands, neither of whom I've seen before live, just announced a tour together, Deftones and the Mars Volta. I'm like, oh my God. So it's an American tour. There are no Canadian dates. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm already on their email list. So I checked the time tomorrow. I got to get up a little bit early, but I will be on, ready to go to buy tickets for probably two shows in two different cities. And then I will figure out flights to get to those cities, right? So I'm excited about that. And part of that's because I have it's a parasocial relationship in this case. Like, I love those bands. Those guys have no fucking clue who I am, but I love their music. It means a lot to me. I own all of their vinyls. All of their vinyls are available. Some bands don't. So to me, it's really important to go and get a chance to see these bands, especially while they're still playing and touring, because there's lots of artists that are no longer there. Now, of course, I'm on a wild tangent here, but if you are so good at your media and your relationships with the people that you coach, you can develop that kind of loyalty and that kind of group of people that will dive into anything you do. They will buy anything you put out there. They will want to coach with you. They want to interact with you. And those are the people who will self-select away from the growing volume of what we will see when it comes to AI. And they want that real person. I think that's going to be a really big key to any coach, being successful going forward. Now, I suppose, who is the audience? Are the audience more coaches, or are they more the enthusiast and more the consumer?
I'd say it's a blend of both. I mean, this is going to be episode, 6 or 7 too, so we're still kind of finding our voice as far as exactly who it's to.
Sure.
But I would like to imagine it's a decent blend of both. I'm interested to just hear on this topic as you're kind of going down this tangent of the analog versus the digital. What are your thoughts as someone who's really grown their personal brand pretty drastically over the years? So just for reference, when I met Andrew, he had maybe 40,000, maybe you were close to 50,000 Instagram followers at the time. Already really successful, I would gather at that point, just as maybe not doing as much speaking publicly, but you seem to be
starting to grow. Yeah, but you're right.
Yeah.
But
but so that's the side that maybe from the Instagram perspective has really taken off. But like, you seem like you were doing pretty well as a coach, right? And a lot of coaches are just trying to earn a living and trying to do something that's not a traditional, 9 to 5 sort of job. When we talk about this sort of building your brand, do you think it's because now you're 150,000 followers, something like that? Yeah. Do you think that somebody has to have that level of social media interaction, or talk to me a little bit more about just building that brand as somebody who maybe has 500, 1,000, 2,000 followers or something?
There's actually a lot to this. So I think there are a lot of people that think, well, if I just grow my following, I will be successful. There are a lot of people out there with large followings, and the average person who follows a fitness account is following a large number of those fitness accounts. So they may not necessarily be following the exact same people, but what you have to do is you have to be visible, engaged, and sometimes it's as simple as just responding to every comment, responding to every message. A lot of people don't want to do that, and I don't find it's very hard to do it. And at the end of the day, you want to be their go-to person, and it's often easier to have a relationship with the people who interact with you than someone like maybe of a level of a Jordan Syatt or a Lane Norton or a Sohee Lee, who are very large profiles. And Jordan traditionally was fairly responsive. I find Lane's not bad either. But, I know all of them personally. And Sohee has very, very firm boundaries around her time and her engagement. So, someone like a Sohee cannot respond to every message, nor can the others. So if you're a coach and you can respond in a meaningful way, with a voice or video message that says someone's name, that's a deeper personal relationship. At the end of the day, like, it is social media. I didn't do this because, hey, I want status within the industry. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. They're seeking status. They want to be revered and worshiped without actually having to interact with people. And there's something wrong with that line of thinking to begin with. But at the end of the day, I mean, what are we here to do is to help people, to engage more people. And at the risk of maybe once in a blue moon, one of them gets like really out of hand, or, has, some false sense of like the nature of social boundaries. But guess what? You're going to find that in real life anyway. I've dealt with plenty of those people in my real personal life. Okay, cool. You got to get good at filtering those people. So I think for coaches, it's not about large social media. So large social media done well can be a tremendous asset. It's about good social media and be engaged in front of the people that you have. I've been very full time for, I've been in the industry almost 14 years. full-time nearly the entire time, since very early on working in a commercial gym. And fairly early on, I was just posting on Facebook to the people who are part of my friends network. And that alone, because I was treating it sort of as a blog, I was posting videos of what my clients were doing. And that contributed to making me very visible within local communities way before Instagram is really a thing. And that generated a lot of referrals. I remember a quote. So an old friend of mine got hired on with the old company. Would have been probably 12, 13 years ago. And he was going through the orientation class, and the director of personal training was teaching it. And he asked the director, he said, hey, are we allowed to post on our social media? Are we allowed to talk about fitness-based stuff? And which sounds like an absurd question, but valid. And then the director paused and he stopped and he said, well, there are only 2 trainers in the company who actually have any sort of active, engaged social media presence. We were way ahead of the curve. And that was me and Dean Somerset, who is a very well-known, influential, highly respected educator, trainer. He's local here to Edmonton as well. Just spoke at my conference this past weekend. And Dean is probably one of the biggest role models in my career. And so we're also, by and large, 2 of the, you get people who kind of figured out reels and, they're kind of more influencer types, and they, they probably were into some of the stage show competition, and they figured out and they've grown a bit of social media. But as far as people who have a strong footprint of and a history of coaching a lot of people, I would consider to be evidence-based with that kind of track record and a footprint of educational development of educational resources. We're the only 2 in the city, right? And it's because, we were way ahead on thinking this way. Now, there are tons of coaches who now embrace social media, right? Just haven't necessarily grown to that scale. So I was using Facebook to just stay top of mind, present, engage with people, and it drove a lot of business my way. Now, I would argue that then it was probably easier because there was less competition. There was also a lot less. Online training hadn't been normalized. It hadn't hit mainstream at this point. So you're not really competing with the other people all over the world who the local person can follow and go, hey, I like this person in Australia, or I like this person in South Carolina who's doing really great stuff. You couldn't reach out to them and go, hey, can I coach with you, and actually have a relationship or an interaction with them. And nor did you have a lot of these scalable online programs, whether it's Renaissance Periodization's hypertrophy app, or their old templates. Those were kind of early on in niche, or Jordan Syatt's Inner Circle, or so on and so forth, right? There's a lot of iterations of stuff. So now there's a lot more global competition. So part of success story is survivorship bias, and the fact that, when I entered the industry, I think there are massive advantages that social media presents right now, but I think there's a massive advantage at the time for a lot of people weren't doing these things. So there was opportunity to grow. So some of my experience doesn't necessarily translate into the coach who's maybe a year or 2, 3 into the industry, but I still think some of the stuff's valid. So I know I'm wandering a little bit there, but
No, I think it's great. And I think the thing that's always stuck out to me the most about you is from the first time I followed you, and you already mentioned this, it's still true today, you within probably 10 minutes sent me a personal voice memo. And that's something I've started to incorporate, or at least really thought about, okay, how can I start to incorporate this into my social? And it feels a little disingenuous for me sometimes when I'm doing it, because I'm like, who cares? I have 500 followers. Nobody cares about getting a message from me. But the reality is, it's probably more impactful from somebody who's maybe a potential client to hear hey, this is something that I actually value. I appreciate you taking the time to follow me. I'm here if you have any questions. And your message was essentially that. It was hey, thanks for the follow. I don't think you knew who I was yet because you were coming to a conference that I was going to be at. And then you were like, oh, wow, that's so exciting. And just the interaction back and forth was really meaningful. And it made that relationship, I feel more valuable, where it's I look forward to seeing your information more than somebody like Lane, who I really like, but have no personal or social interactions with. So.
And it's funny, I'm not able to do it that much anymore, or for a while, bring every single new person coming in. It's physically impossible. But where possible, I try to, I respond to everything, right? If someone tags me in something, I'm going to respond to them. If someone asks me a question, I'm going to respond to them. Unless it's, so if you have someone coming in, so we're talking to the coach here, if you have someone who comes in and follows you, and if you're not at like massive social media scale, yeah, you have the opportunity. You can, say hi to them, because they're going to be one of a few things. One, they're going to be just a spam bot, right? And if you reach out and say hi, and that spam bot doesn't respond, or unfollows or whatever, well, you're not out anything. It's no big deal. Right? It took a few seconds to reach out. Maybe it's someone who is a fitness enthusiast, and you are the one who opens the door to say, hey, if you have any questions, I'd love to chat with you, etc. Then that'll kind of wow them. And then all of a sudden you have a warm interaction there, right? So, and it's not just about generating leads, although that's an element of it. It's actually just being a nice human being. Or it might be a peer. And so let's say it's a like-minded peer in the industry who likes your stuff. Well, then, I think about this. I just had a conference recently, like this past weekend, and quite a number of the attendees were coaches across North America who had added me to Facebook a long, long time ago. There's sort of like this big network. And so, yeah, I just add these people, and then over the years you interact with them. And many of them now I have met in person at various conferences. Some of them I still haven't. They all interact with each other. And because of that interaction, that like at first that social relationship via social media, and there's a fair bit of familiarity. And then all of a sudden they realize a few of them are coming to this event, then they all want to go. So it's not that it's a transactional, hey, well, if I do all this, then like a lot of good stuff will happen later, right? But that's kind of what ends up happening. If you just generously try to do low friction, kind, interactive things on an ongoing basis with people, then things tend to pay off in the long run. Like for you personally, professionally, a lot of good things happen. And I think a lot of people, some people are just wired. They just do not want to be on social media. Fine. I get it. Understand it completely. Right? It's just not how they operate. They have young families or whatever. But I'll say to the coach who's averse to social media, when I entered the industry, you could get away with it. Now it's very hard to, going forward, get away with not building a personal brand unless you get in an environment where you are going to give away a portion of your income because you just want to coach and put your head down, and you're within a company that is good at marketing and filling you full of clients. Now, they're only going to do that as long as you are retaining those clients and also generating your own referrals. So there's still great importance on relationship and feeding your own business. You just may not have a public facing social media brand that, pulls more people in. So, and then you're also trusting that that company is going to stay strong and solvent. The company I started with, over time, they lost market share. They're making bad decisions. They were not keeping good employees happy, and they were sweeping a lot of bad behavior from bad employees under the rug, which pretty much just tarnished their reputation over time, lost their good people, and eventually they went bankrupt. So you can be good until you're not good, right? And this is true of any job, any career, anywhere. So I think that having a robust array of skills, having good relationship capital via social media, brandable, accumulating brandable skill set, and, creating not just social media, but long form resources, like whether it's articles or having a podcast or YouTube or what have you, other educational things. Those things are transferable no matter where you are. And it's not just about the fitness industry, it's anything.
Yeah, and I think there's so much up and down and uncertainty just in the industry as well, right? You talked a lot about AI and how that's going to be changing and shifting just sort of the entire environment. So I could foresee an environment in 15, 20 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, where big box gyms aren't even employing trainers anymore, right? So being able to build your personal brand so that you can have people that are coming with you, right? Or, you get terminated and now you can't work with those people anymore. So to start building sort of your assets, if you want to call it that, from a social media credibility perspective, I think is super important. And then just, I think it's so important, you said too, like differentiating yourself, right? When it comes to AI, when it comes to all of these different resources that are going to be available over the next 5-10 years, that personal touch is so undervalued in our industry. And I think it's so meaningful to people, and it's worth paying a premium for. And I think people are still willing to do that in this age. It looks like you were going to add something there.
Well, you raise an interesting point. Yes, the big gym companies, I know some of the people in some of them, and certainly I think they invest in their people. I think they really do. But they're also investing in the potential for technology. So what do we got? We got data collection technologies, and we have, coaching softwares. And at what point do we get these gyms to realize that there will be members that want to come in that want to know what to do, to know how to do it, structure and accountability, right? And feedback. So what could that look like? You could have the ability to book, an appointment, training session, whenever you want. So for the company standpoint, if you have an app that can have a program for that person, build a program, has the machine learning capability to choose weights selection, to have demonstration videos in real time. And we may eventually get there. I don't think we're anywhere near it yet, but we may get to the point where you have something that can actually scan someone's movement and provide coaching feedback. I think that's the tipping point right there, is when the algorithm gets good enough to recognize what someone's doing in real time and provide useful feedback. We're not there. And then you have that whole system will probably be lower cost than paying a trainer for the hour, which lowers the cost of the potential member using it. And quite frankly, it may get to the point where this just comes standard with the membership, right? Or at a small premium upgrade. So someone could come in, book times whenever they want. They're not limited by the result, like the time availability of their trainer. I mean, I have a relatively full schedule. Someone coming in and says, hey, I want these 3 times a week. Very, very low likelihood I can actually offer those exact times or move them around at the client's convenience. I just simply don't have that flexibility. So these systems will allow for that. Someone can come in when it's convenient for them. They can show up on short notice. They get all of this feedback. They're still held accountable. And there may be different ways to, quote, penalize or reward that person for showing up or not showing up. And it would be easier from a gym standpoint, as opposed to having dedicated departments to train, hire, manage, pay trainers. So is there a likelihood that at least some of these bigger companies are going to invest in this kind of stuff? Absolutely, right? And it's when it reaches a tipping point. At first, people are like, okay, this is kind of quirky, and then a few people try it. It's like online training. For a very long time, the idea of, well, I'm going to pay someone, a not insignificant amount of money to tell me what to do over the internet. I'm never going to meet them. I'm just going to get my plan, and then when I have questions or whatever, they're going to respond to me, and not necessarily in real time. But what ended up happening, it became a little bit more common. Really good trainers with great brands and media would then have people from other parts of the world saying, hey, I'd actually really like to train with you. So those trainers develop those skills. And you get someone like my friend Jonathan Goodman, who was hanging out with this weekend at my event, who built the course curriculum and the infrastructure to teach more trainers how to build their online coaching. What is that? The more people are doing online coaching, the more this is talked about via various across social media, but people who are interested in fitness, the more they go, okay, cool, this is a normal thing. That reaches a tipping point where almost anyone would consider, well, I could hire a coach here and I'm held accountable. I have the structure. I have all these things I need. I can get a hold of them when I really need to, in a reasonable amount of time to respond. So you got that human element. Meanwhile, they can go to the gym whenever they want. So they have a little bit more freedom and flexibility. And then all of a sudden, what do we have? We have a global pandemic that shut everybody out of gyms. So the only way for most people to access coaching and a lot of people then needed some sort of new structure, accountability to keep them going, a new way to do things, whether it was initially just body weight programs and bands and whatever equipment they could get their hands on. So you see this skyrocketing demand for online distance coaching. And so what ends up happening, it becomes mainstream. It becomes a very normal, viable option that almost anybody would consider, as opposed to, well, the only way I'm going to hire a trainer is to go into the local commercial gym and sign up for one. Now, all of a sudden, most people consider both those options. Now, there's a lot of people who just simply won't ever do online training. It's just not for them. But there are other people that would never go back to having to fit into a trainer's schedule one-on-one. It's also a good reason why I think every trainer needs to embrace at least offering an online something, and you work on the skill as well. I was a late adopter to it, considering my tenure in the industry, but I have a really nice online coaching business, and I would say now, all told, my online coaching is probably 30 to 40% of my business.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, as we're talking here, it's like I kind of intuitively know all this stuff from being in the brick and mortar industry for a long time. But just hearing you describe all this, it's like I'm kind of seeing the writing on the wall, right? Like it seems like that would be the most logical thing for big box gyms with large investors to do is to cut out the most expensive piece of that equation, which is going to be the physical people, right? So if you're currently in a big box gym as a trainer and you have no online presence or you have no intent of ever doing anything, you're probably not going to be a trainer in 5 years, quite honestly, right? And we already know there's a lot of turnover in this industry anyways, but it's just really driving home that point of differentiation, thinking of ways to think outside the box when it comes to online training. Now, what we do at the company that I'm with now is it's online, but it's actually still one-on-one, right? So we're still going around the gym with somebody. It's just virtually, and I'm training them, coaching them in real time. But even that is the time for money trade-off is still sort of limiting, right? So the online, go ahead.
Well, here's another example of this very trend, and it just occurred to me. Have you gone into a commercial gym in the last couple of years and either A, there are scheduled virtual classes. There's no longer an in-person instructor in some of those cases. You just it's on a screen, so
Yeah,
it's
you're
now
just
it's a real
watching the
person,
person. Yep.
but
Yeah.
it's projected one to many. So that's one example. Two, the commercial gym one of the commercial gyms I attend, they have both live class instructors, but they also have some virtual classes. Someone can go in, they can in the spin studio, they can turn on a pre-planned program. Okay. So you we already have this thing happening a lot with the group side of stuff. Okay. So why would we not see a continuation of this? If someone can literally go into the class and like turn it on whenever they want.
Yeah, 100%. But I just think as a trainer, as a one-on-one coach, or even a small group coach, like not having that mentality of this is shifting and thinking like, oh, well, I'm going to forever be working at blank big box gym. It's like you're probably not. Like if they can save on insurance benefits, they can save on salary, they can save on all those things and pay, say this one person, hey, we're going to give you $5,000 to record 50 video workouts and then we're never going to talk to you again. Like that's probably what it's going to look like for most people. So no, it's just really driving home the fact that I think I've made the right decision. But also making me think like there's so many other avenues in the online space because again, personally, the company that I'm with now, we're still in the like direct time for money trade-off. And there's a lot of benefit to that. And I think it definitely differentiates us in the online space. But I still love the idea of more distance coaching and giving somebody a plan and helping them put that together for people who do want some human interaction, but don't necessarily need that one-on-one coaching environment. So it's just really got my wheels turning. So I'm super grateful we're having this conversation. Before, I'd love to go into this is totally not where I thought this conversation was going to go, but it's great. I'd love to, one of the things I like to talk about on here, and then I really want to jump back into online and kind of what that looks like for you is, I love this evidence-based, this exercise science sort of approach to resistance training in general. And one of the big principles that I've kind of come to understand in my 7+ years in the industry is that things are going to change. And if I'm not adapting my knowledge and understanding, and I have the same thoughts that I did, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I'm probably not actually evidence-based. So what is something with that thought in mind that you've really changed your mind on in, say, the last 3 to 5 years?
I always find this question tough because, I mean, there's a few elements to it. One is I don't tend to dig in my heels too hard on, any particular concept. Maybe it's just because I feel like I was probably, for most of my career, had a good sense and intuition for what actually made sense versus what was rubbish, and getting onto the people who I think are the credible evidence-based authorities in the industry early. So, for example, I always just kind of had a feeling that, mixing up your workouts all the time was, you know, was nonsense. And we now know that the muscle confusion principle, that's total rubbish, right? But that's kind of a long debunked concept. It would go back a really long time. And, I probably was bought into a bit more of the clean eating ideology, and I think that I think this actually went too far the other way. But the quality of food that you eat is actually really important. because it makes it a lot easier to eat the right amount of calories and, of course, the right amount of protein, which is really what matters. It is numbers. There are other complexities, but underpinning it all, you have to hit the right amount of calories, the right amount of protein. These things matter. So, but that's an old one that I've long been kind of pivot over to. And so I'm sort of going to like dance around the question a bit, but I'll give people something I think is going to be more helpful.
Totally fine.
I think if you establish a community of reliable evidence-based authorities in the industry, and I think it's a very dangerous idea to plant your flag on one person, because there's some of the people who I think are some of the better authorities have definite blind spots, right? So, I mean, like, I think Lane Norton is a great follow. You know, Lane, I'll be careful how I say this. Lane popularized the what is it, the metabolic damage like idea quite a while ago, and that one just didn't hold muster. Now Lane has kind of backed off that a bit. Or reverse dieting. Lane is a big one on reverse dieting, and quite frankly, I think reverse dieting is overrated, not particularly useful. If you're dieting someone in a competition, which I don't coach competitors, then I think reverse dieting looked like it worked better than it did, because what it did is it created the illusion that it was preventing people from spilling over and regaining a lot of body fat post-competition. But what was really happening is reverse dieting was just to counter the opposite end of the spectrum to the person who did their show. Then the coach's job was done the day of the show, and then the person just went on a binge for, weeks, and they're consuming in vast excess of the calories they need, and then their body is just like a sponge to like soak up these calories and restore body fat. So the truth, I think, is in the middle. If you get someone into a period of deficit, my goal is, and this is for Gen Pop too, I don't want to reverse them slowly out of that. I want to have them in the deficit for the time needed, and then I want to go right to maintenance. So the answer is not reverse people out. The answer is fucking maintenance. And then theoretically, you can gradually nudge calories in to try, because as you increase calorie intake, that there's a handful of effects. Sometimes we're more fidgety, more active, more neat, but the body will find ways to burn, elevate its metabolic rate with a little bit more food. But there's a point where you just eat too much food and the body can't compensate for it. So, I mean, there are people that like swear by reverse dieting, but I think what it's really doing is obscuring the fact that we're just not having people going into these massive surplus binges right after their diets anymore. And most people coming off a diet, if they don't have structure and coaching, what are they doing? They kind of go off the deep end, right? So that's one of those things. I think that Renaissance periodization and Dr. By Gizzertel are pretty fantastic. I think, when you get into the science of muscle building, I think you get guys like Brad Schoenfeld and Stu Phillips are going to be they're two of the preeminent researchers on muscle hypertrophy. But evidence-based is tricky. I mean, fairly recently we saw this big dust-up and argument between a bunch of people, some of the names I just said, over a study and then the interpretation of the study. So even really smart people in the industry oftentimes disagree on interpretations of certain things. So, and that's why I think you expose yourself to a broad spectrum. We also have, and I'm not saying names, but we also have a bunch of people who are masquerading as evidence-based professionals who don't have the background in research and science, who are interpreting stuff. And then if they're arguing with the people who actually have those backgrounds, then I tend to bias towards, the people who I think are more trustworthy and have the more educational credibility. But then this is where it gets confusing. There are people out there, and I'm not saying names, but someone listening will figure it out, who have PhD credentials, but then are saying obviously false things, like saying that, only squatting to a 90-degree joint angle is optimal. Anything deeper is bad. I mean, that's nonsense. I
don't know. I think I know who you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. It's complete and utter fucking nonsense, right? So there's all sorts of like performative rubbish on social media under the guise of evidence-based practice. But oddly enough, this stuff becomes dogmatic. But oftentimes, even some of the more credible people can actually get quite dogmatic and inflexible in their views. So as you alluded to right away, it's also got to be people who show the willingness to change their beliefs over time. And I think Brad Schoenfeld's a really good example of this.
I was just going to say Brad's been a really good staple as someone who's really changed their mind over the long.
Yes, and this is why I highlight him specifically, because I mean, he will even say that he really believed the old school bodybuilding belief that to optimize for muscle building, you really want to be in kind of this like 6 to 12, 8 to 12 rep range. Lower reps would be, more strength building, and then higher reps is kind of more like, all right, muscle endurance. Now, what we've discovered, and Brad was pretty much one of the leads on the research on this, I think Stu Phillips is in there as well, is figure out that you can actually effectively build muscle at any rep range as long as you meet a few conditions, as long as the load that you're using is heavy enough, about 30% of your 1 rep max, to actually be able to get near failure. You curl a pencil all day, it's simply not heavy enough to actually get near momentary muscular failure. Therefore, there's not enough stimulus or tension on muscle to actually grow muscle. Okay, silly example, but it illustrates the point. And you also have to equate for volume. So, for someone to say, all right, I'm going to do 3 sets of 3 reps of a heavier weight to 1 rep left in reserve, or I'm going to do 3 sets of 10, with a lighter load to near failure to 1 rep in reserve, and say, okay, well, those things equate. Well, do they equate for volume? Yes, there's heavier load, but, we're doing a lot less reps. So those things, based on like simple math, those wouldn't actually equate. But then you flip it around. So we now know that, yeah, you can build muscle any rep range, and you can do pretty high rep ranges. But here's the thing. The old school bodybuilders were actually kind of right, because then we get into this practical sense where, okay, if you do most of your training in very, very heavy load to near failure, big compound stuff, whatever, well, first of all, that's really taxing. Like, that's just tiring, okay? And there's actually more neurological fatigue from very high rep to near failure than low rep. That's sort of an old myth as well that we've, again, that's something I believed. There's your example there. Something I used to believe. Shift with the evidence, now I understand it, right? So I will follow where the evidence goes. But at the same time, if you're doing a lot of really heavy stuff to near failure, guess what? It's fucking super fatigue, super disruptive on your system, your tendons, your joints, etc. So in order to equate for volume, you have to do more sets. You need more rest between those sets. So therefore, you're making your workouts a lot longer. Very inefficient way to build muscle mass. Good for strength training, inefficient for building muscle. And then I don't know if any of you guys have ever done sets of 25, 30 to near failure, and multiple sets of that. It's horrifying. It's awful stuff. Like, think squats. My God, no, you'll be sick. You will literally make yourself puke. So, and even for like things like curls and shoulder laterals, you're not going to want to do a lot of that, right? Leg extensions, the sets of 20 to near failure, horrible stuff, right? So what it comes down to it, if you're doing if your primary goal is building muscle, which is probably still one of the most important things, and for the most part, for most people, beginner to moderates, if you're training for muscle and strength, those things are going to happen fairly concurrently, right? You get into really elite levels of bodybuilding or Olympic lifting or powerlifting, and you see some divide in how you have to train. Funny thing is, the strongest people I know are, by and large, bodybuilders, right? A lot of the OG bodybuilders are freakishly strong. So ultimately, that old 8 to 12, 6 to 12 rep range is the most efficient way to effectively build muscle to do with most of your exercises. Now, you can do a little bit of heavier stuff, mix in a little bit of higher rep stuff. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot because it keeps it interesting. There's also another consideration. Have you ever tried a 3 rep max, 5 rep max bicep curl, right? Or side lateral or leg extension? Your joints are not going to tolerate that very well. Your form is probably going to be awful. So there's a fairly big array of at least the isolated movements that actually don't tolerate those kind of loads well anyway. So you probably need to be in that like 7, 8 rep to 12 plus rep range anyway. So funny thing is, as much as the research points to this one thing, practically speaking, the bodybuilders of the Arnold's era onward, they kind of figured this stuff out. It just seemed to work better, but through practice, right? So, I mean, they did dumb shit, but they also figured out a lot of stuff too. There's a lot of survivorship bias. We're also not hearing the stories of the people who got hurt along the way, right? And we're also dealing with a community of the genetic elite that had, for their time, access to probably the best, most cutting edge drugs, right? So these things also go into the mix as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. There's so much good stuff there, and I couldn't agree more with especially that list of individuals on social media to follow. I mean, Stu's great, Brad's great, Lane's great.
I'm going to give you guys a few more,
yeah,
just because I think there's a lot out there. When it comes to, I think the combination of strength and conditioning, Dr. Alyssa Olenek, and Alyssa's a friend. I think she's really wonderful. If you guys are looking for, this is kind of a pivot. I don't know how many of your listeners are women, but if you're looking for information on women's hormonal health, I'm really a big fan of what Molly Galbraith and Girls Gone Strong have done. They've got a menopause course that goes much, much deeper into hormonal health. And guess what? If you're working with women clients, and women on average make up more fitness consumers, then at some point in their life cycle, they're going to go through this. But it also goes into hormonal health stuff at a broader range. And they brought together a huge collection of incredible people. So I think that's the best resource of that. I'm a big fan of my friend Joel Jameson when it comes to energy systems and conditioning programming. That's great. So I think if you go down that rabbit hole, you'll probably find, a lot of good people, but I think following a diverse array of people, and go in and don't take everything at face value. There's a lot of people that I like and I trust. I think on the average are really good. And sometimes they just get caught up in something, and it becomes a little bit part of their identity and their brand. And even the best intentioned people sometimes have a hard time coming back from those places. And then there's a lot of really convincing people that sound like they're very evidence-based, and they're not. And then the other side is you get some people who are so, quote, evidence-based that they become dogmatic and tribal and quite vicious and combative with anybody else that doesn't meet their sort of standard of everything. And even their interpretation of evidence can sometimes be limited based on the fact that maybe the quality evidence isn't all that good. Yeah. So that can be a little bit of a quagmire to wander through, especially if the people involved tend to be very combative. Now, you get someone like Elaine who's very combative, but he's combative with obvious charlatans, people who are talking about drinking their own urine, or God only knows what other kind of shitbaggery these people are doing. So I think it's also a test of your critical thinking skills. And I think a lot of people, you can't outsource your decision making and your critical thinking with blind trust experts. We've seen a lot of problems in a lot of different domains, and this is not a social ideological thing, but we've seen a lot of so-called experts become corrupted with all manner of other agendas, to the point where we've seen a loss of trust in the institutions in our world now, which includes news media, social media, even authorities. And this is not an argument to go down the conspiracy theorist rabbit hole. These things are always tricky, and people get kind of pissed off about this stuff. But I think collect your information from a broad array of resources. Think critically about what's being presented in front of you. Question the agenda of the people presenting this information to you. And then I think go in making the most informed decision possible. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And Lane, I've heard him talk about this quite a few times as far as how to differentiate between people worth following and paying attention to versus obvious charlatans. And some of the big red flags are obviously people who use extremely hyperbolic language, people who speak in absolutes, people who never question the results of anything. I think Brad does a fantastic job of doing that. He always adds in my humble opinion, and doesn't say this is absolutely the way that things are going, and if you don't believe me, you're an idiot. So, it's the Liver King versus Lane kind of thing, right? Is somebody speaking in absolutes, or do they have a little skepticism in even their own results and how they're interpreting it? And if you've never seen somebody that you're following correct themselves, then they're probably not somebody that's worth following, right? If they've always stuck to their guns no matter what, then that's probably a pretty good indicator that they're kind of full of shit. At least that's been my experience.
Probably a good hack is if someone is walking through a grocery store aisle and demonizing something, that is pretty much a red flag that person is a grifter and a charlatan. Okay, so that's actually a safe bet, right? Yeah. Unless obviously the substance of the video is someone kind of making fun. I think James Smith went in, and James Smith will sometimes, the British guy, take the piss out of the people doing this sort of thing. So look closely, but it's obvious when it's satire. But yeah,
that's not an American expression. So take the piss just means screwing with people.
Yes. Yep.
For our non-Canadian listeners out there. Okay.
Is that a Canadian phrase?
No, I heard it when I was in Australia. I think it's pretty common in other parts of the world, but
probably a British thing.
Yeah, it must be
Canadians.
British.
We get a little bit more British influence than Americans do. A little bit.
Yeah. I think it's definitely probably British. So last couple things here, because I'm sensitive to your time, is if somebody's interested in transitioning into the online space, do you have any maybe tips and tricks, ideas of how to maybe build some social media content? What does good social media content look like? And then maybe just like program structures ideas quick as we sort of wrap this up.
Okay, so I think it's just an idea capture. So if you're having conversations with the clients in front of you, people in general, stuff you're seeing on media or whatever, you're surrounded by potential ideas. You just turn around and share them on social media or long form media in ways that reach people, and you have to practice to get better at it. So maybe it means like and I'm not great with video editing at all, so I don't mess with that stuff. Maybe one day I will. A lot of my content is written, whether article or short form pieces for social media. And video right now is quite popular, right? And only growing in popularity. So I would think it's wise to embrace video. I tell that to myself because sometimes I'm talking to myself to remind myself. But the ideas are there. The clients are asking you questions. If they're asking you questions, one person's asking it, other people are thinking it. You can turn around and you can talk about that stuff, explain, share, all that sort of stuff. And if you're a coach who's trying to figure out online, well, just think about this. You would program, what does the client need? They need their program. They need, instructional videos. They need a way to basically learn how to do it. So what do? You build programs, and then you figure out a way to deliver those programs, whether you send them text-based Google Doc type stuff, or if you use an online coaching software. I use a couple different ones. I like True Coach. I write for them even now, and I like that for one-on-one. I use Jonathan Goodman's Quick Coach for my one-to-many group. I think Train Heroic is an amazing platform for one-to-many. There are definitely other softwares out there. That Coach Catalyst is a really good one. My friend Trevor owns that. Awesome stuff. Okay. And then, yes, you have a vehicle to give people their programming, and then you probably need a video library to show people stuff. So some of these softwares have their own embedded libraries. I find those things are very, very hit or miss. So I think it's worth the investment of going and filming your own exercise library. Upload it to YouTube. You can use it for a lot of things. It's attached to an email lead magnet. I have a free program on my website. Someone can go in, put that in, and then there's linked videos to everything in the program on my YouTube channel. And I don't do a lot on my YouTube channel, but it's there. Who knows, maybe more in the future. So you got the video library, and then you just have to have a way for those people to, communicate with you. And maybe you're communicating over email, or you have, with my clients, I prefer not to use the in-software messenger. So I have them, and if they're global and they don't have an iPhone for iMessaging, maybe it's WhatsApp, right? Or maybe they message me on Instagram, or maybe they message me on Facebook Messenger. And yes, I'm okay with having different clients message me in different spots as long as I know where they are. If I've got messages coming in from 3 different platforms, that is where it gets really confusing. So I think people get caught up in needing systems first. I think you need to coach people first. I think you need to figure out, what does a person need? And then you just go and do it. And then you will build your systems by actually doing the coaching side of stuff. Just make sure they've got a great experience. And then you'll figure out, all right, how do I streamline this? Instead of filming a demo video every time for each new client, just fucking film it once, upload it somewhere, and then make sure it's linked to it. So that way it's an easier experience for that client, and you're not repeating a lot of the same stuff. Right.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful, and you've already given so many great points as far as like creating content and what that could look like. Any other like really pertinent last ideas for somebody who's maybe trying to build their personal brand before I let you go?
I think the more you are authentically yourself, the things you're interested in, the lower friction the experience is going to be, and the less likely it's almost like if you're trying to curate a false sense of who you are, it's like crafting a lie, and then it's harder to remember all the lies. So you might as well just be real and be you. And I heard this recently. I think it was probably on a Chris Williamson podcast, Modern Wisdom, by one of the guests. But if your online persona is different than your real life every day, and I think it was in a dating context. So if you are like a false sense of who you are via dating apps or social media, or whatever, and then you turn around and you meet the person, but it's true of coaching as well. Well, you either have to keep up the charade, which is going to get exhausting or eventually break down, especially in a personal relationship, or when that charade breaks down, the person who was lured in based on this false sense of who you are, all of a sudden turns around and is just like, there's friction. You don't like each other. And people do this in relationships. Probably a big reason why a lot of relationships fail is because people try to present themselves as being better than they really are. It's a natural human thing. And all of a sudden, then out come the sweatpants and the potato chips and the couch and whatever. And it's like, what the hell? This is not what I signed on for. And the same is true when it comes to coaching and social media. So I think the more you can be yourself, I mean, we mentioned Lane a couple times. I've hung out with Lane personally. We spoke at an event together. Lane is a really nice, genuine, caring, awesome guy. The Lane you see on social media is a slightly amplified caricature of real Lane, right? It's authentic. It's just he's amped up for social media. So it's not fake. It's just like he projects a little bit more of that to be, because he knows the game. He's been good at it for a long time. So he's a little bit more bombastic, but he's still essentially himself, right? So I've met people in the industry who present themselves one way via media, and they're actually they're quietly something else. And sooner or later, several of those individuals have either had very public cancellations, teardowns, repercussions, because they're at their best, they're actually very bad people who are just acting to try to look good for status, and then they abused it, and the next something terrible ends up happening, or they haven't yet been, right. So, and usually they're status chasing, or but that fakeness will punish you sooner or later. So you may as well just be yourself. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is they're afraid of sharing the things. Like, I love the band Tool. I'm wearing all this sort of stuff. My cat Ozzy, like, again, that big loud noise we heard earlier, thought he might have knocked something down. Turns out he was just as spooked as I was. Or the bands I love. I got excited again this morning because two bands that I love just announced they're touring together. I've never seen either of them. So I'm going to figure out later today, pick which cities I'm going to fly into one, bounce over to the next, and fly out, and probably be a 2 or 3 day trip. I'm fucking excited about this, and I will share this on my media. So those things interest The Witcher, the video games, that sort of stuff, RPG type stuff. And that's going to repel some people. Okay, cool. That's fine. But the people who like that stuff will like me just that much more. And it might be the distinguishing factor with someone want to coach with me who likes my media and someone else's media, but we happen to like the same bands, or we happen to like the same Witcher stuff. Guess what? They're going to choose me, right? And that's the way it works. You can't be all things to all people. And if you try, you're for nobody. Yeah. Logan, thank you for having me, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, give us just a little tag for all your social quick so people can find you, and we'll
I'd love to have you guys at Andrew Coates Fitness on Instagram. If you heard this episode, please send me a message. I will respond, I promise. If anybody's found this through my media and you like how Logan goes about it, he's got a really nice sort of soft, genial nature as a host. Just check out what else he's got going on with his other episodes, please. And yeah, reach out. I will respond to anything. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you all again soon.